Now, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, member of the Intelligence and Appropriations Committees. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
You bet. Good to be with you.
So, your reaction first off to this deal announced between Russia and the U.S.?
I think it's a very positive step forward. And look, this is going to be really tough trying to place these stockpiles under UN supervision in the middle of a civil war. But nonetheless, it's the first path that has the potential of taking these weapons off the battlefield so that Assad can't use them again. And more than that, when the regime ultimately falls, it ensures that these weapons don't get in the hands of Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, Hezbollah, or others who may use them against us or our allies. So this, I think, is a very positive step forward. It's a positive step on a long and tough road ahead. But I applaud what we've been able to work out.
Interesting, because earlier today you said that President Putin is like a lawyer who lost control of his client, meaning President Assad. But with this deal, did he just get his client off?
Well, I think he got his client perhaps back under control. We'll have to see. But yes, I think he's like the lawyer that lost control of his client. If he were as shrewd, if he were that chess player that people are making him out to be, all of a sudden the grand master, seeing moves well in advance, he would have told Putin in no uncertain terms a year ago, drawn his own red line and said, look, you're ahead on the battlefield. Don't do anything stupid like using chemical weapons that could drag the U.S. into this conflict. But he didn't do that, and if there were any independent heads, which there aren't in the Kremlin, they'd be questioning him. Why did you leave it go to the brink when Assad had momentum militarily? So he's trying to gain control of his client. We'll see in the weeks and months to come whether he can do that successfully. But this is in Russia's interest. It's also in the United States' interest, because had we gone through with a military strike, that may have deterred Assad, it may have degraded his capability, but it would not have dealt with the problem of those chemical weapons, and those might ultimately have fallen in the wrong hands.
Yeah, and I want to get to that in a moment, but if Syria does not comply with all these deadlines that are being laid out, should the U.S. use military force?
Well, I think the U.S. needs to act in concert with others. The primary concern I have is that the U.S. may have been at the verge of acting unilaterally, and I don't think we should act unilaterally in pursuit of a international convention against the use of chemical weapons. So what I think the administration needs to do now, during the process of Syria compiling its inventory, the process of getting the inspectors in, is it needs to work on an international consensus for what we do if the regime balks, if they stall, if they hide. We need to try to find an international answer to that problem. We have some time to do it, and I think that's got to be priority number one.
So I want to talk about precedents here with you, because Assad is believed to have used chemical weapons. So if this deal happens, his punishment will be just turn over the rest of his stockpile. Iraq used chemical weapons on Iran and the Kurds throughout the 1980s war. Nothing happened until after the Gulf War. So is there enough of a deterrent to stop other militaries from using them?
Well, that's a great question, and I suppose it all depends on how this chapter ends. I don't think it's going to be enough merely to take the chemical weapons away. The people who use them, and Assad himself, ultimately are going to have to be held accountable. I'd love to see them dragged before an international criminal court on war crimes charges. I'd love to see those named within those special units that have responsibility for chemical weapons put on a list of those that will be tried as war criminals. If we can hold them accountable, it will tell future dictators and their henchmen that if they go down this path, they will be ultimately called to account.
Politically speaking, Representative Schiff, does this deal match the rhetoric that we've heard from President Obama and Secretary Kerry over the last few weeks? And does it matter? There are so many who've criticized this president, saying his speech was coming from different directions and didn't have this cohesive message. And yet the fact is the president said, we want you to stop using chemical weapons. And it would seem that if this deal goes through, he's won without launching one Tomahawk missile.
Well, that's the thing. If we look back, say, 6 or 9 months ago, and we were to see in a crystal ball that we'd be at the point today where Syria would be signing the Chemical Weapons Convention, agreeing to UN inspectors to take away these weapons and destroy them, all without a single shot fired, we would say any administration that can make that happen has got to be brilliant. Now, it's been ugly getting here. This has been an uncertain and checkered step forward, but this is where we are. And this holds the potential of getting those weapons off the battlefield. Now, is this going to be as good as the hype? Well, the time alone will tell if we can enforce this, if the Russians are serious about this, if Assad can be brought to heel on this. It's going to be a challenge, but, you know, there are some precedents that should give us some optimism. And if you look at what the inspectors were able to do in Iraq, it was opposed by Saddam Hussein. He tried to hide, he tried to delay, but nonetheless, it was largely successful in going after those chemical stockpiles.
There have been recent reports that the U.S. has supplied light weapons via the machinations of the CIA. They've finally begun reaching the rebels. Can you tell us anything about the scale of these supplies or why it's taken so long after President Obama's announcement?
Well, I can't get into great specifics, but I can say that I don't think we're talking about a level of weaponry that's likely to change the balance on the battlefield. And this is a concern that I have, which is if it's not enough to change the balance, we're going to be called on to provide more weapons. And if those aren't enough, we'll be called on to provide even more sophisticated weapons. And pretty soon, you are stuck in the middle of this war and taking ownership for it. And then if the regime falls too precipitously and there's chaos and Sunnis start massacring Alawites, then it's going to be our responsibility to fix this broken object. No one wants to take ownership of this, and so I'm concerned that arming these rebels is going to lead us on this slippery slope to greater entanglement in the war, and I don't think it's the right path for us.
I have to say, I always appreciate the thoughtful answers you give me when I ask you the questions that I know you really can't answer, and you're going to tell me you can't answer them, but nonetheless, I appreciate it, which is why we will have you back again, Representative.